Mr. Donalds from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Allow me to actually respond to my colleague on the other side of the aisle. The issue with Ukraine is not that members on my side of the aisle don't want to support a democracy in Ukraine. That is not the issue. The issue is that while spending upwards of $114 billion in said conflict with, frankly, no end in sight, because the president has not led in any of this effort, mind you. He was drug into this conflict because of his own dereliction of duty when Russia was amassing troops on the Ukrainian border for 6 months and President Biden did nothing. He dithered, he ignored. And only when Putin actually went in, his first comment to Vladimir Zelensky was, "I'll send a G5 for you, hop on the plane and let's go home." That's what he told Vladimir Zelensky. And it was only until the Ukrainian president and, frankly, people around the world said we should stand for Ukraine, then Joe Biden did an about-face. So that's number one. Number two, the issue that a lot of Americans are having right now is that we have spent $114 billion on the Ukrainian conflict to defend Ukraine, which, by the way, I do think we should do. But at the same time, we have recklessly disregarded our own southern border and our own national security, which is affecting many states, many counties, many localities who are now not just on the southern border, but basically in every city in the country. Don't believe me? Go ask Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, who is now very concerned about the fact that we have more migrants in the city of New York than they have space for because of President Biden's reckless policy on the southern border. So I would urge my colleague on the other side of the aisle is don't do this in a vacuum. Please understand that you have members who want to be supportive of Ukraine, but they are very concerned and now at this point apoplectic that we have spent $115 billion on Ukraine, but we can't secure our southern border. That is why members on my side of the aisle are furious, frankly, with Joe Biden and those who want to use Ukraine as a leverage point.
Will the gentleman yield for
I'm not
a question?
yielding. You had your time. I'll let you talk. I was going to interrupt you, but I didn't want to. I ain't yielding. Now, point number three, and this is very, very clear. With respect to Ukraine's sovereignty, I'm very familiar with the Bucharest Agreement. I think every member of the chamber is now familiar with this agreement. We signed on to protect their sovereignty if Ukraine returned their nuclear ballistic missiles back to Russia. That was the '94 agreement. We signed on to that as the United States of America. I believe that we should uphold that agreement. I do. But when you see Russian troops amassing on the border of the same country we have an agreement to protect, and you do nothing, your inaction as the commander-in-chief cost the United States taxpayer $115 billion. That's why members on this side of the aisle are frustrated with Joe Biden and his lack of action. Now back to the Department of Defense, because that's what I'm really here to do, but I had to set the record straight. Here's the issue.
May I just ask a question quickly?
No, because you're not recognized. Now, back to the Department of Defense. Here's the issue we're having. We want to spend money to defend this nation and to make sure that our men and women have every piece of equipment necessary to do so. We want to make sure they have all the bullets, all the tanks, all the ships, all the equipment necessary. But the frustration you're having in Congress, you're seeing, which I'm going to tell you right now is growing, is the complete disregard for fiscal sanity at the Department of Defense. We cannot continue to just fund contracts in infinitum with no idea of how we're actually going to acquire the material we're paying for, getting the material that we have maintained in an orderly and timely fashion, and that the men and women who are on the front lines, not the brass, not the people over at the Pentagon, the men and women who are on the front line are getting what they need in a timely fashion. I don't think you would have many issues from Congress to be able to fund that. But, and I think Mr. Khan, you spoke to this before in your comments as I was watching the hearing before I came in, the issue is that DOD can't even find a way to just go through the audit process and come through with minimal findings, which is something that publicly traded companies have to do, and it's something that the current SEC would demand they do. Forget the other agencies for that matter. So that's the issue we're having at the Department of Defense. I want to fund our military. I want us to be a lean, mean fighting machine. That's what I want. But as a member on the Republican side of the aisle, I got serious concerns about funding the agency if the bloat and the waste continues. Procurement reform is critical. Last quick question, I believe I'm going to send it to you, Mr. Mansfield. I understand that we spend a ton of money on diesel fuel, but don't you believe that finishing the Project Pele project and actually getting it up and running and doing it consistently, won't that be to the betterment of the Department of Defense? And I'll close off that.
Sir, I'll take that one for the record.
All right, the chair now recognizes Mr. Lynch for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.